Welcome to Yatesbury House Farm. I am Richard Gantlett and I'm very excited to be with you here today to share my thoughts and experiences. Yatesbury House Farm is about 1,600 acres of silty clay loam over lower chalk and some lighter chalk soils. We are growing mostly cereals. We have a pedigree Angus suckler herd. We use diverse leys and we're growing as many trees as we can fit into our landscape. What's particularly exciting is that we discovered a few years ago we are fixing 10 times more carbon than we are emitting. And that's mostly been soaked up in the soil, but I'll come to that later. Our farm is set in the mystical and historic landscape of the Yatesbury World Heritage Site and the Cheryl White Horse and Monument. Access for people to come and visit these sites is really important to us in engaging the public, because if we can engage the public by giving good access and information while they're here, I hope we can engage them in how we farm and how we're bringing nature into welcoming nature into our farm. We farm without the plough, we farm organically, which most of you will be familiar with, and we farm biodynamically. I'll just explain about biodynamic farming a little. There are three parts to it. First is that we use biodynamic preparations, which is firstly carefully composted cow manure that we use as a soil inoculant. And then there's a preparation which we spray, which is finely ground quartz silica crystals. And we spray that on and it rebalances the plants and actually brings more sunlight back into the plants. So that helps protect them from disease. The second part of Biodynamic is that we operate as a mostly closed farm, so we try not to bring things onto our farm. Clearly we have to bring some diesel on for our tractors and to dry our crops, and we bring small seeds that we can't grow ourselves. The third part is that we treat the farm as one whole farm organism. So the fields of wheat and the woods, we don't think of them separately. Woods are really important, and the hedges, because they look after our predators. The predators then have somewhere to live and establish, so when we have pests that come along to our crops, the predators are ready and waiting to rebalance those challenges to our crops. Another part of that holistic approach to our farm is that the cattle are allowed access to the woody areas. It might be a few trees on the edge of the field, it might be the hedges on the edge of the field, because we're now putting the fences behind the hedges with the help of Fipple, so that enables browsing. It enables shelter from wind and from sunshine. If you're checking the cattle, you can always go and find them in the woods at about 11 o'clock in the morning or 12 after they've had their morning graze. It's a really lovely aspect. Cattle welfare and letting the cattle exhibit their herd instinct is a really important part of our farm philosophy. In fact, we're developing this into what we call our forest farm approach, where we view in the future having a fence on the boundary of our farm and the cattle being able to wander around the farm in the autumn, so that we perhaps fence in the crops and allow the cattle to wander everywhere else, turning the current philosophy of fencing in cows slightly on its head. We operate a rotational grazing system. This means that in the spring, the cattle are grazing for a period of 3 to 6 days when the pasture is growing really quickly. We then move them on before they go to eat the plants that have already been eaten in that grazing period. So what we don't want is the cows to eat those young tender shoots, because then that stunts the growth. What we want is the plants to grow up and the roots to grow down, and then when they graze, you get this dynamic effect of the grazing. As the plant growth slows down in August, we then give the cattle a bigger area to graze. And then in September, again, it gets bigger and we'll leave them in areas for longer and longer. So that when we get to the autumn time, the cattle can then have access to the whole farm through our forest farm approach. When the cattle have access to the woodland, the positive impact is really visual. They are very good at beating back the brambles. They allow clovers to grow in the soil. They'll bring those seeds in from the pasture. They'll eat the ivy off the trees and browse on whatever they feel is appropriate at the time. We've all been surprised how beneficial it is to allow cattle access to the woodland. From the point of view of the biodiversity that is created from the cattle browsing, they open up the woodland, they allow new species to establish under the trees because they're bringing seeds in from the pasture. So some of the dominant invasive species like brambles, they push back and allow other trees, plants, even legumes to establish. They're browsing at the same time, which gives them a diversity of nutrition, so it's really important for their health. So they know, they remember what's there. Fortunately, since we've been in organic conversion, we've done soil sampling across the farm, and so we know that we've approximately doubled our soil organic matter. And that meant that in reality, from a carbon point of view, we were storing 10 times more carbon than we were emitting. From research I've done myself on the farm, using proper scientific method, we found that we're actually storing carbon at a rate 2 to 3 times faster than the global targets. And it's not the above ground leafy stuff doing that, storing the carbon, it's actually the root activity underneath. So we've got two things going on when we have these diverse mixtures. First is the sampling effect, where we always have the best mixture that's available. Because it's such a diverse mixture, we'll always have the perfect mixture available for self-selection in any part of the field or farm. And the other factor is what we call a niche differential effect. So different species can occupy a different niche in the soil. So some white clover, some species are shallow rooting, they'll establish in the top surface layer of the soil. Other species like sandfoin or cocksfoot grass have much deeper roots, and as a result of this research, I've realized that the longer the ley, the more carbon we can store. And actually in the experiment, we found that if the ley was 5 years, there was no peak to the amount of carbon we can store. But we know that if we lengthen the ley phase, we can increase the amount of carbon that's stored. I used to be worried about weeds as a conventional and a farmer in organic conversion because I was worried about their competition with our crops. Now I view them as our ecological treasures. Here we are, this weed, wild geranium. All these roots are breaking up our soil when we have our crop of wheat, so we'd never have a monoculture anymore. These are providing food for the soil biota and the farmland birds. So after the ley phase, we grow combinable crops, cereals, wheat or spelt, oats and spring barley or spring wheat. All of these are grown for human consumption. And that's another important farm philosophy, that we're growing these cereals to feed humans and not to feed animals. This is 2024. And as a farmer, this has probably been one of the most challenging seasons I can remember. But our soils have developed so much that what we're seeing is their capacity to adapt, and not just adapt, but these living systems that are in the soil really have a capacity not just to bounce back, but as living systems do in a term called homeostasis, they have an ability to bounce forward, to adapt to the circumstances that arrive, and then to improve, just like an athlete does. Whereas 30 years ago we'd find huge puddles of water across our fields on our silty clay soils, this year we have had some high rainfall events, lots of high rainfall events, but the field's capacity to be able to withstand those and then recover afterwards is just incredible compared to how it used to behave 30 years ago. If we bring all these positive activities into one word, that one word would be health. All our farming activities aim for a community of countryside and people full of health. We've made a lot of changes in the last 26 years. Imagine the North Wessex Downs in 30 years' time, where all our soils are bursting with life and producing healthy food because nature is supporting our farming and we are supporting nature.